Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 6 and the finale of my Aries 1B from Moebius, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I had gone to Wonderfest and returned because at the end of this I'll be showing the final product with the painting from Oggie Gonzalez, which turned out incredibly. A few parts of this video are a little choppy because I had to stop working on this and start working on the Mandalorian N1 Starfighter. And so I had to go back and film some things afterwards, and so they're a little bit out of whack. So a few times I put some text in to kind of explain the situation. But anyway, let's go ahead and see the final progress on the ship, creating the base, getting the rest of the ship put together, and then we'll see the finale as well. So, all right. All right, so I'm working on how to suspend the model on my base, and I'll show images of the base later. Basically a piece of wood that's 1 foot by 2 foot. It's going to be angled, but I'm going to have it suspended on a brass tube, which I showed in the previous stills. So I also have this aluminum tube, which is the right size for the brass tube to fit snugly inside of. So I'm gluing that. Well, first of all, let me back up. So plan ahead, plan ahead, plan ahead. That's my mantra. I did not plan ahead, and I went ahead and glued this on. Luckily, I was able to break it off without damaging it any. And I had to go back in with a Dremel and cut out those supports in the center so that tube would go through. Because I want a nice solid support for this. It's got a little bit of weight to it. It's not super heavy, but I don't want it to be in danger of breaking off. So I'm going to have this aluminum tube. The brass tube is going to come up and go into it, and basically just set the ship down onto the brass tube, which will be secured in the base and nice and solidly. So just so it's slightly up off of the base, so it looks like it's in flight. And so once I got that hollowed out, I put a hole in the top as I showed. And so I cut off this piece of aluminum tube, and so far I use super glue with an accelerant to get it glued in on the end. It doesn't look quite centered, but I think those lines are not exactly showing the center. It's pretty close, and it's okay. It doesn't have to be exactly centered. The brass tube, when I'm done, is going to be painted black or gray, so it'll kind of blend into the background. But what I want to do right now is, now that that's tacked in place and that bottom is sealed, because that's the opening for the brass tube, the aluminum tube's in there, I'm going to go ahead and fill this with 5-minute epoxy. Pretty much almost fill the entire thing to really solidify this tube in place, so it's not going to go anywhere. And then I'll be ready to attach this back onto the kit, and I'm going to reinforce that quite a bit with 5-minute epoxy as well, so that that's not going anywhere. And that's why I have it extended a little bit further up, because I want to encase that in probably some plastic and 5-minute epoxy, so it's nice and sturdy, since it's going to hold the weight of the kit up from that brass tube. All right, so let me get some 5-minute epoxy in there. All right, so I'm starting to work on the base that the ship is going to be suspended from. And obviously I mentioned that there's going to be a painting behind it from Oggie Gonzalez, which I'm not going to actually get until Wonderfest, because he's bringing it with him when he flies there. And so I'm just going by some pictures, and I know the sizes of it. So this plank here is 2 feet wide. It's a little less than a foot. It's about 11¼ inches wide, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same measurements as the painting. The painting is 1 foot by 2 foot, 2 foot long, 1 foot high. So I'm going to have it, and this is on an angle. So I have this on a piece of wood that I screwed and also put some glue on it into the piece. I'll get the measurements for you here in a moment, tell you what that is. I just wanted it to be a little bit of an angle because I want the ship to look like the ship is going to be kind of angled a little bit towards us. So I measured off a center point, which isn't necessarily where it's going to go. So I'm working out where the brass tube is going to go down into the wood and how that's going to work. So I need to put this inside of the ship, and I need to get a general positioning of it and a general length of it, because I'm going to drill a hole right through the wood, and the brass post is going to actually be nice and secured and glued down into the wood so it's solid. Then the ship itself will be removable, and it'll just slide down onto the post through that middle piece that I glued in the aluminum tube. All right, so let me extend the landing gear on it. Let me go ahead and measure it out, put it where I think it's going to be, and then I can look at drilling a hole into this wood. And then I'll be ready to start working on some of the scenic material to look like the lunar surface. All right, so as you can see from the previous still, so I did get all of the clay onto the top of this for the lunar surface, and I let it dry. It worked really well. I really like this air dry clay. Now, the thinner parts dried within like a day, less than a day. Some of the thicker parts, like these bigger ones here, were still kind of, they were mostly dry, but they were still a little bit flexible. So I just gave it a good 2 days, maybe 3 days while I was working on other things and let it harden. Once it did, then I went over it with some various paints. I started actually with just using my Krylon black, which is kind of a semi-gloss, and got it in certain spots. It was already a dark gray, but I just hit it in some certain spots to make them darker. Then I went over it with some various grays from Vallejo that I got recently at the IPMS convention in Indianapolis. I'd shown that during my video for that. So they had some grays, mostly like one was called Cement, which is a nice light gray, some other darker grays and neutral grays, things like that. And just went over and highlighted it. Then I went over and just misted it with white and kept doing it until I got the result that I wanted. I think it turned out really nice. Now, of course, I don't have the painting, so I'm comparing it to some pictures that Oggie had sent to me of it. And so once I get to Wonderfest and I get that, then I'll be able to put that on there and get it connected. But I have the spot in the back left for the painting. And I also went ahead and put some sides on it, on both sides. And I ended up putting a piece here on the front because it wasn't really sitting the way I wanted it to, with the painting being, you know, pretty much almost 90 degrees in the back. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a piece of the thin wood that I get from my poster frames that I buy from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to have a piece on the back that's going to come up, and I'm going to have some holes drilled in the back and put it in with some bolts and some wing nuts, so it's removable, and then I'll be able to just put that on. And I've been using a blank canvas of the same proportions that I got from Hobby Lobby, just to test it and see how it looks behind it. And also playing with the little, I have like one of my printed space backgrounds from other projects. I think it was from my Discovery that I was building, just to kind of test with it, just to kind of see how it would look. So, all right, but the post is ready to go. Now I did go ahead and paint the post the same kind of light gray, because when you're looking back through this way, and you're not going to see much of it, it's going to be just showing you the other part of the lunar surface on his painting. So I didn't want to do black because it's not going to have black behind it. But the way the ship's going to be angled, you're not going to see it that much. So let me get ahead and put the ship on there and show you how that works. All right, there you go. So there's the ship down on top. And of course, nothing's glued together permanently, but you can see when you come down low, you can see that post, but it's the same color as the lunar base, so you're not seeing it. And you're not really gonna see it that far down anyway. You're mostly gonna see the ship from this angle. So very cool. It's, now the ship is angled quite a bit, as you can see. So that's kind of cool. So it'll be angled towards us. And it'll be nice because you'll be able to see the cockpit nicely on top when it's all done and lit up. You'll be able to see, and again, this is pretty low to the floor, so when it's up on a table or up on a shelf when I'm going to be displaying it, you'll be able to see more eye level and be able to see inside the windows and see the passenger section. So, okay, but very, very cool, very happy with that. And the base is pretty much done for now. I just have to do the poster board part for the back that I'll be attaching the painting on from Oggie Gonzalez. But that's ready to go. I can put that all aside and then finish getting the ship together and getting this kit ready to go to Wonderfest. All right, so down to the wire, and I am starting to glue in parts that will be permanent. So I have the cockpit glued in. Always nervous about these parts because there's kind of no going back from that, but I tested it several times. I have all the wires trimmed up into one set of wires that'll connect into the ceiling lights, which will then come out of the top of the sphere. So I glued it in at first, and then I went ahead and put 5-minute epoxy around the main connections to get it in there nice and solid. And instead of using the kit part, which I wasn't real thrilled with, I used some PETG, which is pretty easy on this one since it's just a flat cockpit. So it's much clearer, much nicer finish. So, all right, I'm not gonna light that up at this point because I have to get the ceiling together and get that started to glue in. And definitely coming to a conclusion here. I'm gonna start gluing in parts permanently. And I already kind of started. So I have the cockpit glued in place at the top. I have it wired in. I don't have the ceiling glued in yet, and I don't have the TV ring glued down into the bottom part yet. But I'm trying to position it and figure out how I want to do this, because when I display it, I want to be able to see the ship in the right orientation so you can see the things that I want to see. The main part that I want to see, that I've realized when I light it up and look at it, is the cockpit. So originally, and I mentioned about the door, so here's the door over here. So I decided, and a lot of it has to do with how this fits down on top. So there are two sections where there are two pins that you click down into the ship that are remaining of the ones that I cut out because of the magnets. So there's two on one side, two on the other. I believe it's right here. So you have two pins here, you have two pins on the other side. So you could rotate this completely around 180 degrees, and the window would be on this side and it would be facing the other direction. But the problem is, if I did that, then the pilots are upside down. So when you look straight up on it, because it's going to be down at the base like this, and it's not lit up, but you can see the pilots are right side up. So I wouldn't want them over on this side because that wouldn't look right with them being upside down. And I really wouldn't be able to see them very well in that orientation. So it's not going to be exactly like this. It might be a little twisted to the right, and it's going to be angled towards us and that kind of thing once I get the base going and get it onto the base. But I definitely want to make sure that I'm positioning everything where it needs to be, and having things so that you can see them correctly. So let me take the lid off here for a second, and I'm going to show you how I changed up how I'm going to position the different figures. All right, so rather than having the door part this side in the front and Haywood Floyd over sitting here and the stewardess would have been watching the TV, I flipped it over to that side. Because here's the problem. Since I'm shifting the whole ship over and I want to see this as the front, the TV being here wouldn't really work. because you're not going to see it through any of these windows from the side or the front. And again, like the way the geometry is set up on this thing, you have to have either this behind this bathroom or behind this bathroom. So you could flip the whole thing around and it would be fine, but then the TV would be over here rather than over there. So that wouldn't really work. But I think that's going to work out good. So instead, I'm going to have Haywood Floyd sitting right here. I'm going to have the stewardess sitting over here, and there's the TV. So you're going to see the back of her. You're going to be able to see her from the side a little bit and see the TV. You can see the TV through here. You can see it through here. Might be able to make it out through like the side over here. Probably not here because of the elevator being in the way. Plus you can see the stewardess here over this window. Because again, this is going to be the front, but you're going to be able to look in these angles as well on the stand the way I'm going to have it displayed, so that you can look in there and see the different things. So there's definitely a couple of ways you could rotate this and have it going so that you can put it onto there, but I think in the end that's going to be the way that I want to go with and how I want that to look. So let me go ahead and double check this, and then I'm ready to go ahead and get this ring glued down onto the floor, which is screwed down into the bottom. I'm going to take it out first, of course, and I can still get to the screws, so even when I glue that down, the screws are still accessible. So what I'll do, it's not on there straight obviously, so what I'll do is I will take this whole piece out, glue this part onto the floor nice and strong, and then I can still fashion this down inside and get a screwdriver down in there and put those screws in and tighten the floor down onto the bottom of the ship. And then this part's ready to go, and then I can go ahead and start getting the ceiling glued in, which I'm ready to do. And I have the wire coming out, or the connector coming out right here to connect into the other one that I showed you over here. So it's also removable. So when I take the top off, I can unplug the connectors and have it separate, and then plug it right back in, and it's ready to go for the power. So I can display the inside too if you want to see that. So, all right, so let me go ahead and get that ring glued down. I'm hoping that it's going to snug it up enough down to this edge. I don't want any real noticeable gap there. If it isn't, I may have to forego the screws and just glue it down in place, which I don't want to do. So hopefully that's going to work, and I can avoid doing that. So let me go ahead and get this glued down onto the floor, and rapidly progressing to getting most of these parts closed up. All right, so I built this little channel, as it were, to hold the battery inside. It's not something that I'm worrying about it going all over the place, but I don't want it falling down into one of these little engine holes here. I want to be able to access it. I'm not going to be shaking the model all over the place, but I want to be able to have a nice tunnel for it to come into. I might end up putting an end on it. We'll see. Now the floor is going to be removable, so I can access this whenever I need to by just taking off the 4 screws and taking off the floor. But what I'm doing right now is I'm getting ready to put that on with the power and the battery pack. Now, as I showed in the previous stills, I have the sensor right there for the remote control, and it's down in this landing gear well. So this is going to be the front of the ship, facing the front. So this will be easily accessible, and the landing gear will be down. So all I have to do is hit the remote control up in there, aim it up into there, and it'll hit it very easily. But you can't see it. You're not going to be able to see that up in that landing gear well. So lots of great places to hide a remote sensor in this kit for sure. And then what that does then is the wires that come out of the little circuit board here that are on the same side as the sensor go into all your LEDs. So I have one set of wires coming down off of the top, and that's going to wire, well, there's two. There's the one from the ceiling, and there's also the one from the TV, which are going to both wire into this, and then that'll go down on top, obviously the floor. And then I put a disconnect on here as well for the battery, so I can remove it, make it easier to change, and just plug it in, and then that'll power the whole ship. All right, so let me go ahead and get the rest of that wired up. Let me get the floor screwed down onto this, and then I'll be ready to do a test. All right, so I was looking for an option for batteries because of the fact that I have to get them through this narrow door that I fashioned with magnets and get them inside. So initially a AAA would fit in there. A AA was just, it was tough. I could probably finagle it to get it in there. Now, I did a few tests where I hooked it up to just like a AA battery holder with two batteries and let it run, and it lasted maybe about 2.5 to 3 hours, give or take. A lot of mega SMDs in this model, so it's using a lot of power. It's pulling a lot of amps. So while I was on Evan Design's website recently, ordering some supplies at the last minute that I needed, I discovered that they have these really cool AA battery holders that are actually elongated. Instead of being side by side, they're longer. And I thought, oh, well, that's perfect. So I ordered a couple of those. And what I ended up doing was I wired them in series, not in series, I'm sorry, in parallel. So what that means is that the positive from the one battery pack, I connect into the positive of the other one and the negative to the negative. That way, they're both putting out 3 volts and it doesn't combine and make it into 6 volts. So just to kind of get you to understand how that works, the regular battery pack is wired in what they call series, which means that you have the negative on this end for one battery, the positive goes to the negative of the other battery, and then the positive comes out of here. So they're in series. So what happens is these two batteries are 1.5 volts apiece, which makes it 3 volts total because they're in series. If I were to do that with this, if I were to connect the positive from one pack to the negative of the other, and then take the positive and negatives off of those and plug it in, I would get 6 volts, and that would be no good, no bueno for my battery, for my LEDs. So doing it in series though means that I can just benefit from more power, and it lasts longer, and I don't have to change the batteries as much. So that's what I ended up doing. And then what I did was once I wired those together, I took those two leads into the switch. So one switch, I can turn it off. And then I put it into this disconnect, which can go into this disconnect. And then I can fit them into it. And there's plenty of room. So as long as I put one in at a time, they go inside and they light it up. So it's going to work really well. All right, so I got the ceiling glued into the top of the sphere. So the first thing I did was I used some of my Plastruct Bondine, and I started on one side and I just glued in one of these edges and held it in place till it solidified, and slowly worked my way around. This was before I attached these parts onto here. And then as you can see, once it was done and it was on there solid, I went back with some 5-minute epoxy and put that all around the edge because there was plenty of room underneath this. Then what I did was I glued these down around the edge and onto the ceiling part, and then I put some 5-minute epoxy back into this area that I could too. So it's nice and solid. Now, some good news and bad news. So as I talked a few times, this can be on 2 different ways. So you got these two pins, these two pins. So they are reversible. And the main thing that I was concerned about, well, two main things. One was the cockpit being in the right orientation so you can see the pilots the right side up. And secondly, the orientation of the TV screen, because the way that these magnets work, the one magnet where the TV is not in the center, because I couldn't be, because of the little light box for the TV. So that one has to go over top of the box for the TV. So I tried putting it down the opposite way and see if it worked, but unfortunately you weren't getting that magnet to connect, and you weren't getting the opposite one to connect, because obviously this one was trying to match up with one on the side versa. So that created a problem. So I did some reshuffling. So it wasn't the end of the world. Basically all that it involved is that I removed the wire that I had underneath, which wasn't permanently wired in yet, from this side, put it over on the other side, which meant that I had to, well, basically it meant that I had to flip this being down on the base the way that I wanted it to be. So it changed the orientation again. So now, no longer was the TV going to be over here, it was going to be back in the front, which then I wouldn't be able to see it. So rather than try to fuss with it or deal with, you know, the repercussions of where the cockpit or anything else would be, I just decided to leave it. I can certainly rotate the ship on the base, so you'll be able to see that, and it's not a big deal. It's not one of the main things that I was concerned about. So I went ahead and, well, a couple of things I did. So I went ahead and got the figures in. So I moved Haywood Floyd to be over here, so this will be the front shot of the ship. I put the stewardess over here because she'd be watching the TV, so she could just be over here next to him, not a big deal. The other stewardess is kind of offset a bit, but again, it's movable and you can see it, so that's not a big deal. I also added Arthur C. Clarke and Kubrick over there, but their likenesses aren't that great. So, but let me show you what else I did. All right, so what I also ended up doing is, I had told you before that I added a little bit of stripping down on these parts. So once I got this down and I got it in the right orientation, well, a couple of things. The good news is this, with the screws in and with this glued in place, this fits down nice and snug. I don't have to worry about gluing it permanently, which is good. Now, I still wasn't getting a good enough seal, so I went ahead and I put another thin stripping around the whole perimeter, and it seals it up enough, and the magnets hold nice and tight. So, so that's doing what it needs to do now. And certainly I can connect this on and put it on. Everything's working. All the lights are working. So that's ready to go. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and work on getting the batteries into the ship. And then we can go ahead and do a test and see how this is going to look. But looking pretty cool. And definitely getting this ready to close it up and start seeing how it's going to look on my base. All right, the ship is all wired up. I have the battery in the compartment that's removable, and I have a remote control up underneath this landing gear well. So let me go ahead and power that on. Pretty sweet. Sorry. All right, really cool. All right, so I'm working on the windows around the passenger section. So I'm not using the ones that came with it, mainly for the reason that they distort the image that you see. And I want to be able to see in there clearly. And the same reason I did not use it for the cockpit. I used a piece of the same stuff here, which is some PETG. And I had a sheet of it, and I had just enough to cut out all these. So I took the original piece, I put a piece of tape over it, trimmed that out, used that as a template, and cut out these different sections. So This has a clear film, well, frosted film on both sides to protect it, so it didn't scratch it up. It's really nice and clear. It's easy to work with. You can cut it with scissors. So I've already completed this one. Now what I did was I pulled the front piece off, but I did not pull off the back piece so I could protect it again while I'm putting this black trim. And all this is I believe it's 1 millimeter, I'm not certain, but it's some black striping that I got from my local hobby shop. It's self-adhesive, so I just have been cutting out pieces, measuring them off, cutting them with an X-Acto knife, and then carefully adhering them onto it, and they overlap a little bit in the corners. And when it's done, I pull off that piece on the back, and then it's all clear, and I'm ready to put it in the ship. Let me show you. All right, and there is the part with all the film off it, so we're nice and clear, very nicely done. So all I do now is I have the ship here. So they're not curved, but they don't have to be. So what I do is if I put them into this groove and I work it down through, it kind of naturally puts a bit of a curve into it, and it fits down into that groove, as you can see right there. And then the ending is you have a nice and clear window. And those are my Kubrick and Clark figures. I'm not sure if I'm going to use them. They don't really look like them very well. But I have them way over on the other side of the ship, so I might just throw them in there, sort of a little surprise. But you can see I have the other windows in there, which is nice. And they don't interfere with the lid at all going on top, the top of the sphere. So, but they give you a nice clear view into the ship. All right. All right, so there is the board bolted onto it. I drilled holes in the back, and I have some wing nuts holding that in place. So then I can simply attach the painting onto the backing board, which I'm using Velcro to do that. So let me show you how that's going to look. All right, so there's the back of the board, and you can see the bolts that I have at the bottom that go into the wing nuts, and I painted it flat black, just the Krylon spray can. All right, so let me go ahead and show you the front of the painting, and it turned out quite beautifully, and then I'll show you the ship on it, and we'll do the final reveal. All right, there we go, looking quite amazing and beautiful. Oggie did a fantastic job on this painting, and I wanted to try to do it. I have some daylight coming in through my front balcony doors. So you can even see when you look at the space, there's definitely some blues in there and some blacks and quite a lot of stars. The Earth looks fantastic. Just incredible. The crater really gives you some depth. I'm not too far off the colors of the base, but I understood that there was going to be some variance, especially since that has a lot of dark in it for the craters and the shadows, and mine has to be natural shadows. But all in all, that just looks absolutely amazing. Just absolutely great. Really pleased with that. Oggie did such a fantastic job on it. I definitely give him kudos for his skill and just really making this build something special and something amazing, and not just a model on a base. So, okay, let me go ahead and get the model on there, and we will do the final reveal. All right, there we go. Looking quite amazing and incredible. Now, probably what I'll do is have this a little more tilted like that, just because in the back, that leg is kind of making a little bit of contact with the thing. There we go. So basically, that's how it's going to be positioned. So you'll be able to look in the windows, you'll be able to look in the cockpit, see the beautiful background. All right, let me get and turn her on. So of course that's right up in here. There we go. Now it's daylight out, it's gonna be a little hard to see, but I'll try to get the best I can. That looks pretty good, yeah. There we go, looks good actually. So there's your Haywood Floyd eating his dinner. Very cool. We have the stewardess watching television. If you come down low enough, you can make out the lights in there. You can make out quite a bit in there. And you can see a lot more in person than you can through these windows. All right, there's the other stewardess by the elevator. And remember, the top comes off as well, so I can always get in there and do that. And let me see, where are our guests? So if I roll it around a bit, there's my Arthur C. Clarke and Kubrick. Not very good likenesses, but kind of cool anyway. All right. And then of course, if you go up on top, you see the beautiful cockpit, the pilots. Nicely visible right on top of the ship. So quite amazing, quite amazing. Come on, focus. Very happy with that. And when you move around a bit, the Earth actually looks like it's kind of three-dimensional in space as well. So absolutely beautiful. I couldn't be more happy with how that's turned out. And it's exactly what I envisioned. The landing sequence of them beginning their descent to the moon. And you see the Earth in the background, so quite beautiful. All right, fantastic. All right, and one final shot of the ship in its final place for now. I went ahead and moved the space clipper up to the top, because this has to be in a bigger spot, of course, and so does the N1 Starfighter, which I now have back from Wonderfest as well. So I went ahead and put a shelf back up that I had in the center, and that's a perfect spot for the Aries. And then I can go ahead and still have room up on top of these shelves here. I have obviously the N1 needs its own, it can't fit inside my display cases, but I still have a little spot there where I can do something else. All right, but looking very cool indeed. Let me go ahead and turn that back on again. Awesome. Now, of course, you're not going to be able to see the cockpit from down here. I mean, I can take you up there and see. Hopefully you're seeing that. But you can definitely see the passenger section, the beautiful painting backdrop. Just incredible. You can see Haywood Floyd enjoying his meal. The stewardess. Just on kind of a slight angle like that. All right. Very cool indeed. So really happy with how that turned out. I think it's quite amazing and a great addition to my 2001 collection of models. Okay. All right, so that's a wrap up on the Moebius 2001 Aries 1B ship. Really, really great kit. Really enjoyed doing this build and this model. Certainly some challenges, as I explained, and went through the process. But in the end, a fantastic product. I'm so glad that I partnered with Oggie Gonzalez and came up with a creative idea for a backdrop, and he really nailed the image and knocked it out of the park for me. So I'm very pleased with how it all turned out and how the whole product looks. So all right, so I will be posting a video from Wonderfest here probably tomorrow, once I get that footage all put together and then get that wrapped up. I did want to get this final installment of the Aries up first, before I went ahead and went on to that, since you're going to see it in the images from the contest. So I wanted to do the final reveal in this video first. So, all right. Well, thank you to all my new subscribers, and stay tuned for the Wonderfest footage, and I will see you next time.